Question, the member from Toronto Danforth.
Thank you, Speaker. As you're well aware, photo ops are not a substitute for action. They are not. They are not. The Premier is out of touch with what the people of Ontario need. Gail, to the acting Premier.
Thank you,
Speaker. Gail, a single mom from Muskoka, wrote to the NDP to tell us she'd lost her home because her hydro bills were so high. She got behind. She just couldn't catch up. Does the acting Premier think that someone like Gail should be punished for not being able to afford the soaring hydro bills that have come with 14 years of Liberal rule?
Deputy Premier.
To the Minister of Energy.
Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, pleased to rise and talk about our Fair Hydro plan, because it is concerning when we do hear about individuals in this province, Mr. Speaker, that did have a hard time and are having a hard time paying their electricity bill, Mr. Speaker. And that's why we acted, Mr. Speaker, like we did with the Fair Hydro plan. We did bring forward, the 8% reduction and the changes to the RRP back in the fall economic statement. And we recognize, Mr. Speaker, that while that did help many, that there were others that actually needed more support, and that's what the Fair Hydro plan will do, Mr. Speaker. It's going to provide 25% reduction on average to families right across the province. If individuals are a Hydro 1, R1 or an R2 customers, Mr. Speaker, they can see a 40 to 50% reduction. And if they're in any of the low-income brackets, Mr. Speaker, there are many programs in place that will continue to help them, and I hope that they actually apply for these.
Supplementary.
Thank you, Speaker. Again to the acting Premier. Gail's home in Muskoka was 1,600 square feet. She and her kids now live with her sister in Halton Hills in a bigger home. But Gail's sister's hydro bill, her sister's home, are lower than Gail's were because Gail had to pay rural delivery charges. When will the Liberal government finally bring forward this plan they talk about? When will they finally bring it forward to deal with the mess in the hydro system, to deal with unfair rural hydro delivery rates?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I hope the honourable member listened to my last answer, because I said we're actually bringing down distribution costs for 6 utilities plus all Hydro 1 customers and R1 and R2 designations, Mr. Speaker. They're going to see a 40 to 50% reduction, Mr. Speaker. That's dramatic, Mr. Speaker. That is part of our Fair Hydro plan. It is something that we're acting on, unlike their plan, Mr. Speaker, that doesn't even talk about low-income individuals until the last page, Mr. Speaker. We're making sure that we're acting, we're helping all families in this province with a special emphasis, Mr. Speaker. We are putting special emphasis on helping those families that are in the rural or northern parts of our province, because we recognize that they were paying a higher share of the bill, especially, Mr. Speaker, when it came to distribution costs. That's why we're seeing reductions of 40 to 50% on their bills. Hopefully, Mr. Speaker, when that bill comes forward, they will vote for it.
Final supplementary.
Well, you can talk about a bill forever, but you're not introducing it, and we aren't seeing the action. Gail wants to know from the Liberals, how will rural Ontario promote business development and population growth with hydro costs being difficult or impossible to afford? I'd like to know what the Premier's plan is, too, since her press releases and the publicly funded radio ads are pretty short on specifics. When will the Premier, and when will her party, the Premier, deal with the unfair delivery charges that Ontario rural families and businesses are dealing with just because they're outside of cities?
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The summer is by the time we will actually have that in place, Mr. Speaker. But let's talk about, being short on details, Mr. Speaker, and that's their pamphlet on dealing with electricity, Mr. Speaker. They rely on vague principles and this yet to be determined expert panel that'll sit down and actually find some savings, Mr. Speaker. Apparently, you know, they're basing these on calculations that are pie in the sky, Mr. Speaker, with negotiations with the federal government. And I know, Mr. Speaker, I asked before how those negotiations are going. They're actually, Mr. Speaker, they have no idea on how to take off 1 cent from bills, Mr. Speaker. We are actually making sure we're taking off 25%, and when it comes to rural and Northern Ontario, Mr. Speaker, we're acting with a 40 to 50% reduction, Mr. Speaker. We take no lessons from that party.
Thank you.